Five, four, three, two, one, zero. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Willie B, what's up?
What's going on, Larry? How's it going?
It's going good, dude. It's been a while.
It has.
Yeah, I think the last time I saw you is when you were out for a wedding, and then we met up around Charlotte and got some lunch together, and yeah, that was a good time. So, what you been up to?
Oh, just staying busy at work, carting the kids around. Got lots of sports going on for them: volleyball, softball, baseball, multiple
Yeah.
kids in volleyball. Yeah.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Will, he has a whole, well, whatever your terminology is, a fire team, a whole sports starting five, and basketball.
Yeah. We got a basketball team with sixth man of the year.
Yeah. But yeah, so we used to work together out at Greeley Air National Guard Station. We were doing full-time security forces duties together. There was a lot of fun that we had. Let's see, that was from 2011 is when I got there, and I think I left in 2020.
That sounds about right.
When did the pandemic kick off? That's when
it was March 2020.
Right. So I got in North Carolina on March 1st of 2020. So yeah, so it's been a hot minute. But we had a lot of fun back then.
Some would say too much fun at times.
Yeah.
Our bosses.
Yeah, bosses mainly. I still remember when we were on mids and Sergeant Garbizo came in, and like we thought he was off that night. And were you there that night?
I don't know. Keep going. Let me see.
Well, he basically left me and Walt in charge from what I remember. And he was like, don't be fucking around. And of course, we fucked around.
There's a little bit.
Yeah, and so pretty much what I did, that was the night where he was sitting up at the main gate, and I went to the breaker box and cut the power to the main gate, which also cut the power to a lot of the lights to the main entrance there. And then next thing I know, I go to open the door. Before I could even open it, Garbizo pops in. He's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, nothing.
Yeah, that's pretty bad timing.
Yeah, that one didn't work out well.
I remember we used to do a lot of amateur MMA stuff out in the ECF. Ended up just trying to choke each other out, see how long we could not get choked out. Not a healthy practice, but I remember one time Devin ended up with that big strawberry on his face, and then leadership was asking about that, so we had to come clean about a couple things at that point.
Oh, that was around the time. Remember Galindo? Walt accidentally what did he fractured?
He like broke his rib or something.
Galindo's ribs. Yeah, and so he had, because even though he was a civilian gate guard, like he had his own fitness test that he had to do, and he had to postpone it. And he kudos to him. He did not say a word. He kept the guy code. He just took whatever was coming down on him, rescheduled and tested later. So
yeah,
good on him. But I remember, so we would be on mids for 12-hour shifts, take off our gear, and it was just concrete floor, and we would just see who would tap who out or whatever. And I remember it was, there was a lot of times where I was tired or I was trying to do homework, and I wasn't really wanting to wrestle, and then it became some non-consensual wrestling, I think is what you would call that.
There was also some performance enhancing drugs involved too.
What was that?
Can we talk about those?
Talk about
the C4.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just some of those days where you might not have been feeling it as much, might have taken a little private bump, a C4 pre-workout. Not the suggested way to take it. And then it was just a wild man after that.
Yeah, coming at you like a spider monkey after that. Those are fun times. But
yeah, it was.
I remember Walt was the king of not when you didn't want to, he could sense it. He was coming for you, and you're like, dude, just leave me alone. And so I knew the thing was, I would tell him, I'm like, around midnight, your ass is gonna be sleepy, and I'm coming for you. And he's like, ah, whatever, whatever. I'm like,
Right.
okay.
That's the thing is, he would pick on you like that, but then when the tables were turned, he hated that more than anybody else.
Oh yes, he was a grumpy, sleepy guy. And I remember I'd finally got to the point where I would tell him, like, as soon as midnight hits, I'm gonna take you to the back of your chair and I'm gonna dump you out. And I would just go over there, and then he'd yell at me for a minute, and he'd get back in his chair, cozy up. Then I go back over there.
Yeah, I think that's where Salty Walty came from, wasn't it? On
Oh
that
yeah,
crew, I remember
he
one
hates
night
it
we were watching that Lizzie Borden horror movie.
too.
I still remember that so much. And like after it was a good time. He was getting frustrated.
Didn't he hate it when we would put on a scary movie right around midnight too? Because that's when he was trying to take his nap.
Yeah.
I feel like that was part of it. But those were real fun times. I miss a lot of that. Like there's a lot I don't miss, but there's a lot of stuff, the camaraderie and the hanging out with the boys and all that I definitely miss a lot. And it's weird to have all these friends that you hang out with almost every day. Then you either PCS or you move, and then you just don't see those guys
Right.
at all. And you try to keep up with people, but it gets hard,
For sure.
with life and having all these kids and whatnot. But yeah, that's why it's awesome to do things like this and have you on today, man, and catch up. And then we'll get to talk to Peter Young here in a few.
Definitely. Super excited about that.
Yeah, so Peter was a sports broadcaster, I believe, on Outdoor Life Network. He was unknowingly in a cult for, I believe, around 20 years and then was rescued out of that life. His quote that I saw that stuck out to me was, you never know that you are in a cult. You just know that you were in a cult. Because whenever you were figured it out enough to be like, whoa, then you're trying to get out of there. But
right.
But it's crazy because it's like you think, you always wonder like how could somebody fall into that, and so that's what we're going to find out today. I mean, Peter is a intelligent guy. He wrote a book. He was an on-air reporter for sports network. So I mean, very intelligent guy, educated, and somehow things still happen. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that came about.
Yeah, I am definitely curious to see. I know you said you don't really recognize being in it, but I want to see like what that transition into it and both out of it looked like.
Absolutely, yeah. Doing rehearsals for a movie last night on Zoom, and the guy was like, "Hey, the director wants to, or the DP wants to know what's everybody's good side," and I just kind of laughed. I was like,
I don't have one.
I was like, "This what you get is what you get." But surprisingly, every
the
other
backside
dude,
of me,
yeah,
the backside of me,
just not the butt. Just
yeah,
not the butt.
no, the back of my head. Speaking of back of the head, I have a lump on the back of my head, like I was hit in the head, and I have no idea where it came from. Just noticed it in the last like 2 days.
Is somebody like Looney Tunes you, bop
Yeah,
you back of the
I
head?
guess I've been joking that Stacia did that while I was sleeping, and I just didn't wake up for it.
I mean, you might want to just check that out just in case
That can't be anything serious.
could be, yeah. It's not like you have tricare and you could just, go get that checked out real easy, but whatever.
Yeah, that's not judgmental. I don't know what you're talking about, dude.
Hey, Peter, how you doing?
Hey,
Good, how are you
Peter.
guys?
Doing great.
I'm good.
And where are you guys out of?
So I'm out of North Carolina.
Yeah, and I'm out in Colorado. That's where we met up.
Oh, okay. We're in Colorado. I used to live in Boulder.
Okay. Yeah, I work up in Greeley, live in Eaton.
Gotcha.
Yeah, not too far from there.
Where are you out of currently?
Just outside of Bozeman, Montana.
Oh, that's really cool. How you like it out there?
I love it. Yeah, originally from back east, and then was in Boulder for a while, and then Idaho, now Montana.
I like the backdrop and the place you got there.
Yeah.
What's the jersey you got back there?
I got a few, you see my few antlers there. So that is, so I played basketball at George Washington University, and my first book is a novel called The Blue Team. And so that's kind of like my marketing. I had that made up for me to market it. And so our colors at GW were blue and white.
Yeah.
So that's what that is.
Will you tell me the name of that again?
The Blue Team.
Okay. I'm
And
big
it's on
into
Amazon.
reading. Big into reading, love basketball, so I'm definitely
good.
checking that out. Yeah.
I'm working on the sequel to it right now, so hope to
Okay.
have that released later this year.
Oh, very cool. Yeah,
Awesome.
congratulations.
So what type of book is it? Is it kind of talking about your experience in college basketball, or is it an actual story that you crafted?
So it's a novel, and I always tell people it's based on my time in college, but it becomes fiction because the main character was good, and so was the team, and yeah, it's loosely based on my time in college, and the story within the story is it's about faith in basketball, and your greatest enemy is not the guy trying to block your shot or the teammate who won't pass you the ball, but it's your own mind. We are our own worst enemy, and so when the Lord saves us, He saves us from ourselves. Meaning you're not going to become a great basketball player. You could, but if you miss the game-winning shot, you realize life won't end. Life will continue to go on. So that's the story within the story, the moral of the story.
Sure.
Very cool. Yeah, I grew up in a small town in Arkansas, and all we did there was play basketball. Like in high school, I think for like 7th grade on, we had access to the gym anytime, and so we would go up there. We, as tech wasn't as good back then, so we'd come up there with our little boom box set up, put some music on, and we would just like go at it one-on-one, or how many ever people we had for hours. And that was my growing up. And guys I went to kindergarten with, we got to play together in high school and eventually won a state championship together, which was really cool. But
Oh, nice.
didn't get that college experience though. But that's awesome. I didn't know you played college ball. It's really cool.
Yep, loved it. And then I was, I mean, the Reader's Digest version, if you want to, we can get this on the podcast as well, but I was going to be the next Larry Bird, and that didn't happen. So I got into coaching, and I was going to be the next John Wooden, and that didn't happen. And then I got into sports broadcasting. I was a broadcaster for many years and was going to be the next Bob Costas, and that didn't happen. And so now that I've written books, I'm not trying to be the next John Steinbeck or Hemingway. I'm just trying to be the best me. But I didn't learn that lesson until my 40s.
Okay.
I think that's an awesome way to look at it though, for sure. Let's go ahead and let's just dive in and start wherever you feel comfortable starting with all that. How did you become in this cult without knowing it? Because I did like a quote I saw of yours that said, you don't know you're in a cult, you just know that you were in a cult. And that was huge, because I believe it, because there's so many intelligent people. Like, you're educated, you've done all these things, you've wrote books, you're a very smart guy, and it happened without you knowing it. And so I really want to dive into all that. So just start wherever you're comfortable with the story there.
Sure. Well, the story, you really got to go back to 1996. I was a sports broadcaster in little old Pocatello, Idaho, doing the 6 and 10 sports for the local ABC affiliate. I was not married, 27 or 28 at the time. And then I met, my future wife, Paige, this beautiful, tall, blonde gal at a singles Bible study. And before I had actually met her, I had talked to a guy about her, and he knew who she was. I hadn't even met her yet, didn't even know her name. And he said, just because he could tell I was interested, he said, be careful, because she and her sister and her family have this really weird family guru. And I didn't know who he was talking about. But so before I ever met my future wife, I'd heard about the weird family guru, which turned out to be the infamous, bizarre, and mysterious Uncle Robert, who was not an uncle, wasn't related at all. But he ended up taking over our lives. My wife was brainwashed. Her parents, my in-laws, were brainwashed. My kids were. We all were. And he eventually destroyed my marriage, broke up my family, made me doubt my faith. It really turned my life upside down. But I recovered, thankfully. So that's why I wrote the book. That's why I come on shows like this, is to share my story as a cautionary tale. So that's kind of the view from 30,000 feet. But it started when I met Paige, had heard about him because she would talk about him all the time. So even before I'd met him, what was odd was the way she would talk about him. And it just didn't sound healthy to me. It sounded odd. And, like you guys, and perhaps many people listening, I never knew anybody in a cult. Not that I didn't think I did. I never planned on being in a cult. When I thought of a cult, I thought of Jim Jones and the massacre there. I think it was like the late 70s, drinking the Kool-Aid. And then I would think of Waco and David Koresh, Heaven's Gate, et cetera, et cetera. But cults can be very small. They can be very tiny. And that's what ours was. Cults control their members through isolation, secrecy, and paranoia. So Uncle Robert, really kept kind of a tight rein on things, and we were controlled. And over the years, we became very isolated. But it was very subtle. It's very slow, very subtle. As I say in my book, you never know you are in a cult. You only know you were in one. And I knew he was weird and odd. And we can get into it because over the years, there were times where I was very skeptical of the guy. I didn't want anything to do with him. And then there were years where I started to buy in. It was a very long, slow process.
How many years did it take before you think you were bought in at that time without knowing?
So I met I met Paige in 96. We got married in 97. A couple years in, I wanted nothing to do with him. I told her I thought he was dangerous. I had no idea this is what he thought. And again, I'll tell you what that is in just a minute. But it wasn't until about 2015, we would have these conferences. And like, Larry and Will, if we were to sit down together, it would be like, having a talk over a beer or whatever it is, right? A gathering. But with Uncle Robert, it was always a conference because we lived in Idaho and Montana during these years, and he lived in Southern California. So he would drive up to northern Idaho, where Paige's parents lived, once or twice a year. And the conference was basically sitting in the living room listening to him talk for hours and hours on end. By 2015, I had started to get, worn down and eroded. My wife, whom I loved, was constantly telling me how brilliant this man was. I kind of thought he was weird. But over time, he had shared some things that really were quite brilliant, some things that were odd. And so for me, it was almost like just trying to take the easy way out because, the marriage was, I realized that she loved and adored him in ways she did not me. And so I, allowed him to convince me that I was not saved. I was not a Christian. I was a demonic fraud all these years and just lying and thought I was saved. And he did that to everybody. And that's what a lot of cult leaders do is they act as a gatekeeper to God. So, for me, it was more of a last-ditch attempt to try and, save my marriage and have my wife love me versus really admitting I wasn't saved. But that really started about a 2 to 3 year period where I was all in, brainwashed, didn't know it, but, thought that Uncle Robert was the key to saving my marriage and family when in essence, he was the problem.
Hey, Peter, you said you saw that as an opportunity to possibly save your marriage. Do you feel like Uncle Robert capitalized on that? He used that against you to kind of get you to buy in a bit more?
Well, no question. So, Uncle Robert checked all the boxes for a cult leader. And his real name is Robert Booty. Again, he's short, from Syria, olive complexion, completely bald on top, jet black hair, kind of got a little belly. And I'm 6'5", you can't tell, but I'm 6'5". My wife was like 6'1", blonde hair, blue eyes. We have typical Northern European looks. So we weren't related at all, but very cunning. Uncle Robert was very cunning, strong knowledge of psychology. So he would, whether he knew it or not, I don't know, but he would use all of your weaknesses to his advantage. Again, that's what cult leaders do to try and secure and maintain control over you. They find your weaknesses and they exploit them. And so he knew that I loved Paige and wanted a strong marriage. But Paige was always his most important convert because Paige, again, my former wife, when we met, she had 2 master's degrees. She was a beautiful woman, tall, blonde hair. She walks in a room and everybody would notice, right?
Yeah.
And she's well-spoken, obviously intelligent with the 2 master's degrees. And then here's little Uncle Robert, who I never saw had a job. He never worked. We would send him tithe money. Kind of had an odd accent coming from Syria.
Right.
And the fact that Paige would follow and revere this man gave him instant cachet, right? People would say, well, if Paige believes this Uncle Robert guy, there must be something to him. So Paige was always the key for Uncle Robert.
So what was he selling that she was buying? Because I mean, normally I feel like you hear it's always like it's very handsome, suave, like cult leader that uses that a little bit, but it sounds like you said he's kind of short, had belly, so it wasn't necessarily that. Like, what was it that he was selling that was so compelling that made sense to people?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't have a good answer to it, but I can certainly, throw out my ideas. So Robert met Paige's parents at a tiny seminary in probably late 60s, early 70s in Fresno, California, and started that very parasitic relationship then. So Paige's parents were kind of ripe for a person like Robert to come into their lives. So they met at this seminary before Paige was even born. So for all of those years growing up, Robert was kind of a go-to authority on literally everything for her parents. And then as a young child, she grows up always hearing these stories about how incredible Uncle Robert is. And, she would see him once or twice a year growing up. So she knows no other world that this man is the expert. And he knew the Bible very well, which is an important point to make. So when I, go on podcasts like this, one of my goals is try and help people, warn them about the dangers of small cults and try and give them a bit of, let's say, nuggets to help them spot a leader, spot maybe a friend who might be falling into a cult. And so the point I want to make now is that, cult leaders don't come to people with lies and nonsense right off the bat. They would be dismissed immediately. They start out sounding really good. They start out with the truth. So Uncle Robert knew the Bible really well. Like he'd read it a dozen times or more. But then he would take each Bible verse, right? And he would give it his own unique, perverse little spin so that many years down the road, it was anything but the Bible. So the best analogy I can give is, if you mishit a golf ball by like that much, right? Mm-hmm. Well, 100 yards down the fairway, it's way off to the left or way off to the right, nowhere near the flag, right? Well, that's what he would do. So 5, 10, 15 years down the road, you think you are hearing from this wonderful preacher who knows the word of God really well, and you're nowhere near what the Bible really means, if that makes sense.
I like that analogy. Yeah.
They're kind of just cherry picking the verses or the topics, the lessons within that work for what they're trying to get across in that moment. But down at the finish line, they're far off.
Sounds like the Master Manipulator Handbook.
Yeah, and he was very good at it. And it was very subtle. Again, it took a long time. So you go from 1997, when I first met him, to 2015. That's almost 20 years. And so for most of that time, I went along to get along with my wife. But the first time that I was really skeptical of him would have been probably about 2001. So 9/11, we all remember 9/11. And I grew up in New Jersey, so I had high school classmates that were in the buildings. I had a high school classmate who was widowed that day. So, it was a fairly important moment for most Americans around our age. I think it was about a year later, Robert was talking about 9/11 and how 80,000 people died that day. And then he started to go into about how FDR was a Jew and Truman was a Jew. And he said it was such violent venom. And I had, grown up in Jersey, so I had Catholic friends, Jewish friends, Greek, Italian, you name it, everybody, right? I mean, and we would all kind of make fun of each other, like there's no big deal, your kids, right? But with the way Robert, like spat out the word Jew, I was stunned. I've been married about 4 years now, so he was a part of our lives, not as big a presence as he would become in a few years. But this was my first introduction to one of his bedrock theologies, which was just raving anti-Semitism. And it goes back, if you know your Bible, the story of Genesis, there's these two brothers, Jacob and Esau. And Esau's supposed to get the birthright, Jacob steals it. Okay, so he says Esau becomes Edom, which becomes modern Jewry. Jacob becomes kind of the father of Christendom. I don't doubt that. But then through all of that, he literally believes, or would teach all of us, that every war, recession, depression, bank run, plane crash, you name it, was a Jewish conspiracy. Well, I remember like, you gotta be kidding me. So I told Paige that night, I think this guy's dangerous. I don't think we should have anything to do with him. And that was 2001. And she listened, she was concerned, but I never followed up. I never followed through like I should have. Which of course then begs the question, well, would she have left me then? Would she have left me after 4 years of marriage and not after 20 years of marriage? I don't know, but I just know that with everything that came out of his mouth, my wife believed it. Hook, line, and sinker. So did my in-laws. And eventually so did our children. I was the only one who questioned it.
And yeah, there. I mean, we're seeing, you know, the effects of some of that hate right now over, you know, in the war going on currently. But that definitely, you know, you start hearing stuff like that. That's going to set off red flags. You're going to think, okay, this man has hate in his heart, and he's obviously really trying to repeatedly let us know that. And so that would, yeah, absolutely set off a red flag.
Well, here's another red flag for you. So my in-laws lived up in northern Idaho. So up near there, there's an Indian reservation on Indian reservations all over the country. You have casinos now, right? And that's ubiquitous. So there was a casino about an hour away. And we would have our conferences, and then Robert would take the adults and my wife, and they would go to the casino. But he called it two things. Number one, he called it his office. And he never had a job. I never saw him work ever, like literally ever. Never had a job. But he also said casinos were the true churches in America. And the churches that you and I would go to on a Sunday were a complete waste of time. And casinos were the true churches in America. And I thought, wow, that's kind of a whopper. How's he going to explain that one?
Yeah.
And the idea was that, you know, anybody could walk into a casino, regardless of race or gender, creed, your bank account, success in life, whatever, and be blessed by the Lord. Okay, he has a point, but, you know, I see people worshiping money at a casino, not worshiping the Lord. I mean, it can really ruins lives, right? I mean, like, listen, you want to go on a Friday night with your buddies and play blackjack, fine, but like, don't think you're going to make a living at it. The casinos are big, fancy buildings for a reason. The house always wins. But it was the classic example of him taking something, a nugget of truth, and then perverting it. And he did that with everything.
So do you think, did he make a living off of the tithing money that everybody was sending him? Is that how he got by?
Well, that's, again, the funny thing is, you know, when you're in it, like I was, you don't see, you know, the obvious elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Early on, I did. You know, early on, I saw him as a threat, but early on, I didn't know about Jewish conspiracies and casinos as churches. That came many years later. But after I had been, you know, rescued from the cult and had started to recover, I talked to an old college friend that I was describing, you know, casinos as churches and that we would tithe to him. Now, we as in, you know, my family, my wife and I, my in-laws, one of my wife's brothers was also in the cult, like one of the guys. It was very small. And, you know, Robert was not getting rich off of our tithes, okay? We didn't have that much, but we would send him money every month. And my friend says, wait a minute, Peter, you guys were sending him money every month and he would go to the casinos. And I said, oh boy, when you put it like that, it doesn't sound good, does it? And it's obvious, right? And you guys are probably like rolling your eyes like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But at the time, I didn't realize it. Yeah. So do I know, was he taking the tithe money and gambling? I don't know. But even if he wasn't, you know, the idea that you're going to go there and try and make a living off the casinos.
Yeah. Absurd.
It's absurd. Yeah.
Sure. And it also, even if he wasn't using that for the casino, he's still profiting off of that predatory relationship he's established with your former wife's family and her.
Yep.
It's just unfortunate.
Yeah. Using a position of power to, to profit off it or whatever he's trying to do. You know, there's a lot of that in the world in different forums and ways. And it's always bad.
Well, the relationship that he had, I think probably two words that are very good, are parasitic and predatory. You know, he really was a parasite on our family, on Paige's family, and a predator as well, in that, you know, again, he preyed on our vulnerabilities. He preyed on our, once he got us brainwashed, the ability to control us.
Absolutely. I am curious, Peter, you said that you only would see him once or twice a year, typically. Mm-hmm. Was there communications happening across the rest of the year?
Oh, yeah. So, you know, again, he lived in Southern California. During all these years, we lived in Idaho for much of it, and then Montana when we moved, and Paige's parents lived in Northern Idaho. But, you know, we would all talk to him on the phone, on the cell phone. And so there would be days where, you know, my wife would talk to him for over an hour. And my father-in-law would talk to him almost every day, literally every day, about anything and everything. And it got to the point where, maybe 10, 15 years into the marriage, my in-laws started calling him dad because they felt like he was their father in the Lord. They're about the same age. We would call him Uncle Robert. They would call him dad. And they wouldn't make a single decision without running it by him. And oh, by the way, like here he is, he's trying to, claim that he's, more enlightened and more holy and more Christ-like than any of us. And yet he's having, these hour-long conversations, not daily, but pretty close, with my wife. And she's my wife, right? And for me to ask, hey, honey, what did you guys talk about for an hour? That was an egregious affront on her privacy for me to do that. Like, it was none of my business what they were talking about. And that's just wrong.
Yep.
Yeah, this is weird because then that tells you that he was trying, whatever manipulating he was trying to do, he wanted you to not know that. And that's definitely not good, but because it's weird because you would think that he would want you to know everything because he's trying to keep y'all all in the circle. But when he's starting to try to keep you out, maybe he's realizing that you are questioning, and maybe what he's trying to do, he's worried that you are going to undo some of that.
Well, cult leaders do not want to be questioned.
Right.
When you are in a cult, which first of all, no one knows they're in a cult. No one ever joins a cult. The cult does not exist. It's always something better, something more enlightened, pure, whatever.
No secret handshake, no initiation,
Right. Yeah, like it just does not exist. Oh, we're not a cult. Of course not. But of course, you can't question the cult leader. And I was the only one who would. So I was constantly getting myself in trouble because I would question the cult leader. And I do think that Robert probably sensed that and saw that from very early on in my introduction to him and my relationship with Paige. But his grip on her was so strong. And again, that was always the key for him, was Paige. She really was kind of the cornerstone of his little cult, basically. Again, by the way, Paige would deny all this very angrily. So would her parents. So would Robert. I don't know if they've read my book, but they would deny it all.
It's so tough because it's like she never had a shot. Her parents were already in this, involved, too deep before she was even born. So it's almost the thought of, whenever somebody is born into a life that's pretty rough, and how hard is it to get out of that? And it's not fair. It's rough.
Well, you make a very great point, Larry. And the point is that, if you read my book, it's called Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger. Listen, I tried to be very fair and very kind to my former wife, but there's a lot that she has said and done that will make you kind of angry. And it's horrific what she's done. And she needs to be responsible for that. But the bottom line is she's a victim as well. She's a victim just like I was. And like you said, she's almost never had a chance. And so I was hoping that one day I would be able to try and help her, see the light, have her eyes and ears open to the truth, like I had mine. Now, again, along the lines of me wanting to be the next Larry Bird when I played basketball in college, or to be the next Bob Costas when I got into sports broadcasting, the Lord doesn't need my help, right? Like if the Lord is going to help Paige to really figure out and finally see what Robert has done to her, I need my help to do it. He can do it on his own. But yeah, she's lived in that her whole life. Here's an example that'll show you how strong it is. So we had 5 children.
Oh, wow.
I love being a dad. So we had 5 children, and we had talked about having a 6th. And if it was a boy, we were going to name him Matthew. So this would have been like a year, maybe after this, the 2015 conference where Robert had convinced me I wasn't a Christian. Around then, let's say. And we went out on a little date night. She got dressed up. She looked great. And here we are at a coffee shop, and she's telling me about her desire to have another child. But the child that she wants to have is not going to be with me. She wanted to be a surrogate and provide Uncle Robert with a grandson. So Uncle Robert had 2 sons, and those sons had granddaughters. So Uncle Robert had no male grandson to carry on his precious bloodline. And to Paige, that was a travesty that had to be rectified. So here she is in her early 40s, knowing that I wanted to have another son. And she says to me, I will not, under any circumstances, have another son with you until we can at least offer the chance to Robert and her son, the older of the 2, that I would be a surrogate and have a male grandson for him. And I remember being sickened and stunned by this. Well, honey, what happens if you have a daughter? Well, we'll try again. What happens if you have 5 daughters? We'll try again.
Wow.
So, needless
Wild.
to say, it never happened. But then what that did was just, she was furious. She was irate with me because I didn't go along with it. I didn't want it.
Yeah.
And that just drove the wedge further into our marriage and kind of pushed her even closer to Uncle Robert, who thought it was a great idea.
I don't even know how you would even react there, but that did that kind of turn that light on for you as to, man, this is bad. Like she is so all in. Having a baby is obviously a huge thing for a woman and what it does to your body and the process. It's a commitment. I mean, it's huge, right? And so the fact that she would be willing to not only try that but keep trying, that really shows you how deep in she is. And then that had to have been a moment for you of this is bad. That would be a scary moment as a husband. That's rough.
Well, the eye-opening moment came about 2, 3 years later. So, when I knew that she wanted to be the surrogate, I think what really went through my mind at that point was, you know, she's absolutely devoted to this man. He's not going away. Maybe I just need to try and find a way to get along with this man and to hopefully one day, maybe see him to be brilliant like she does. That day never really came. But the eye-opening moment came, again, it was a few years later. She had left me. It was January 2017. She left me. She started to teach the children that I was the devil, that I was Satan, that I was a sorcerer because I had lied and I was never truly a Christian. And I had not been honest when we got married 20 years prior, et cetera, et cetera. So she and Robert at that point, again, this is just a few months after she left me. So now I'm the enemy, right? Because I'm now no longer within kind of the inner circle of the cult. So I have to be attacked. They both started to say, you should really just be a friend to the children. So we had 5 kids. And since I'm such a danger, I'm the devil, I'm Satan, I should just be a friend, really remove myself from their lives because I don't want to imprison the children. This is a quote. I don't want to imprison the children in biological determinism. In other words, they started to call me just a bloodline and a sperm donor. Whereas just a few years prior, Uncle Robert's sperm and bloodline was holy and needed to be protected. So when they started to turn the tables on me by just calling me, well, you're not really a true father, you're just a dad and a sperm donor, then I knew that was wicked. And that really kind of started me on the road to seeing how wicked his ideology was.
How old were your children around that time? Or what was the age ranges there?
Yeah, so say in 2017, my oldest would have been 18, and then the
Okay, so
youngest would have been 6. So some of the kids were young when all this happened. And then, one was already a freshman in college, the other one was in high school. And cults are, this is not just my opinion, and this is kind of the consensus within the medical community, cults are mentally and emotionally abusive to children.
yeah.
Now, thankfully, there was no, and I should point this out to your audience, there was no physical or sexual abuse or violence. Paige and I never fought. There was no fooling around. I never wanted to have an affair, never even thought about it. I loved and adored her. As far as I know, she never had one either. There was no sexual abuse or physical abuse from Robert, again, that I know of. And we homeschooled our kids, so we were around them all the time.
Right.
So we didn't look like a cult, right? Like we didn't look like a
Sure.
cult, shave our heads, wear weird clothing, live in a commune and all that. But it's still the mental and emotional trauma and manipulation is abusive to kids.
Yeah, because they're so impressionable, and especially if you take a position of a power or a leadership with them, it's a very evil thing to manipulate kids. I mean, they're learning everything, and so they're so curious, but then you're filling them full of poison and lies and things like that, and they're taking it in. And it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier, whereas if you were born into that and you're getting so much of that throughout your childhood, it's gonna be tough to go backwards and say, wait, maybe dad's right. Maybe we need to step back and take a look at all this and think about this. But if it's been around your whole life, it's gonna be a little tough. But my
Well,
thoughts were the older children, were they questioning things ever? Like once they were, you know, at a point to where you're really thinking on your own, things like that, or was it just were they in so deep?
Well, so let me, I guess, kind of maybe set the scene a little bit more. So our little cult was maybe 12 adults at the most. So it would have been, you know, my wife at the time, and then her parents, and then a real uncle. So like my wife's brother. The rest of her family was shunned. So the Clausen family. So all the other real aunts and uncles and cousins and my wife's other three younger siblings were all shunned because of Robert. You were either for him or against him. So that's the same with all cults. You were either with us in our tiny little circle the wagons community, or you are against us. You're the enemy. Same with ours. But then my family, the young family, so I'm one of 5 kids. My brothers and sister-in-laws, nieces and nephews and parents were around the country. So they knew about Uncle Robert, but didn't know much about him. They kind of thought it was weird, but didn't say much out of respect for, my marriage, because they knew Paige adored the guy. So for the kids, to answer your question directly, they spent far more time around my in-laws, my former in-laws, and were more influenced by Robert, by their mother, and by the in-laws. So yeah, they bought it all. And then, their mother can be be very intimidating and very strong-willed. And so, at times they're probably scared to death of her, right? Of crossing their mom. So they bought it all. So they believed her, right? That's what kids do. So they believed that I was the devil. They believed that I was Satan and a sorcerer and a bloodline. There's an interesting story about a year after she left. I was just kind of seeing the kids on the weekends. And shortly thereafter, the courts intervened and sent the kids back to me, the 3 youngest kids, full time. But before that,
Great.
Okay.
So before then, we were in the car, and one child got very angry with me, and there were 2 younger kids in the back seat, and they kind of were quiet. And then this one little voice says, Dad, if I was a devil, I would want someone to tell me. And so they truly believed that I was the devil.
Yeah.
I just didn't know it. But, Uncle Robert and their mother were doing me a favor by telling me and pointing it out to me that I was the devil.
Yeah, you can't fix it if you don't know about it, right?
Right. So, but yeah, so then I guess to jump ahead a little bit, I was completely defenseless. I was never suicidal, but in 2017, when she left, I was still brainwashed, so I had to recover. And I thought it was all my fault. So I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, lost 30 pounds. It was a wreck. And I didn't tell anybody, because when she left, she told me not to say anything. So she took the youngest kids with her, the 3 youngest, to Northern Idaho, moved in with her parents. The 2 oldest boys were with me for about a year, and they believed her wholly, did not believe anything I said, thought I was a devil with no soul. And I didn't tell anybody in my family for about 4 months, no one locally in Montana, where I live, till finally I just had to reach out, because I was having my access to my 3 youngest kids cut off. And then, of course, friends and family who found out, immediately saw the red flags. I thought, wow, this is crazy. I didn't see it yet. So they were very patient and very kind with me. I did finally see it, finally recognize the danger. They convinced me I needed to get attorneys to help out to try and get access to my kids. So that's what I tried to do. And I did not want the divorce. She filed for divorce. I fought it as long as I could. I was hopeful that I could save the marriage, but I was not. So then the courts, we basically got a guardian ad litem involved, and they are appointed by the court to look after the best interests of the children. And they saw it right away. I mean, they saw horrific parental alienation, which is where one parent badmouths the other, basically.
Yeah.
To the kids. And then the cult influence. So the courts sent the 3 youngest back to me. So, out of our 5 children, it's a mixed bag in terms of how much they have recovered from all of this.
Sure.
I don't think any of them have anything to do with Robert Booty anymore, but some believe their mom wholly and still think I'm the bad guy. So parenthood's a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm hopeful that my relationship, with the older ones will improve. But it's taken its toll, and it takes a lot of patience to get there. But
Absolutely.
I know for me, I've recovered. Like, I know for me, I was brainwashed. I was in a cult, and I didn't want to believe it. Somebody sent me a book, and it's a great story. It's in my book. Somebody sent me a book on cults shortly after this person found out that Kate had left me, and I was kind of being now shunned by Robert and her family, Paige's family. And this book on cults sat on my shelf for about a year, and I thought, oh, come on, it was weird. Uncle Robert was a bad guy, but it wasn't a cult. And then I read the book, and I'm like highlighting every other sentence. I'm like, it was a cult.
Oh, this is true.
It sure was a cult, yeah. And so that's why I do stuff like this now is to bring awareness to it. Because, during those years, I was a sports broadcaster. I was on Outdoor Life Network. I was on ESPN. I was on Fox. And nobody had any idea what was going on in my private life. And so small cults can hide very easily. It's important to be aware of that fact. And the biggest key really is to maintain communication.
Right.
Because cults really control and thrive on secrecy and isolation.
Yeah.
Somebody's maybe vulnerable, they're a loner, or somebody's just died in their family, or they're broke, or whatever it is. They're seeking answers, or seeking help, and they're isolated. Well, that's when you are vulnerable to get sucked into a cult.
Sure.
But you said you can't have people questioning. Well, you can't have that if you don't isolate, right?
Right, exactly. Right. And again, here's the important point too. The truth doesn't mind being questioned. Right? Like, you can ask me any question about my faith. I may not know the answer, but I'm not afraid of your questions.
Right.
Truth doesn't mind questions. Cult leaders do not want to be questioned.
Which really, I mean, in general, that's something that we're getting away from. It's getting to where people, if they have different ideas, everybody in the social media stuff, everybody's just at each other's throats. Where it really should be a moment of like, you can talk about your reviews and you can have different views, and that's okay. And we just don't do that anymore. But that's off topic. But yeah, I agree.
So, if you've got a friend that's, whether it's Friday night bowling, book club, Bible study, whatever it is, and all of a sudden they stop showing up, or, they stop calling, emails don't get answered, whatever it is, if you have a friend or relative where you're noticing this, I'm not saying they're in a cult, but that's a red flag. And then this person has all kind of praise for a new person in their life, pastor, teacher, coach, life coach, whatever it is, and no questions are allowed. Again, those are red flags.
Right.
I'm not saying that person's a cult leader, but those are red flags. Ask him, tell me about this guy. Tell me about this person. And then if they don't like questions, again, those are red flags. From the Christian perspective, the idea or the analogy is that we are the body of Christ, right? Okay, so we're a body of believers. Okay, if I cut off my finger, I'm not going to die, but this finger's going to die, right?
Right.
And so that's the same thing with us. The person kind of gets cut off, finger gets cut off. Well, that person now is vulnerable. But when he's connected, you're far less vulnerable, because the best way to describe Uncle Robert was he was a false teacher. And if I had a lot of people around that questioned him, we would have gotten to the truth much quicker. That, this guy's kind of crazy.
Absolutely. So he's still alive, Uncle Robert?
As far as I know, I have no contact with him. I really have no contact with my former in-laws either. The divorce did go through. I mean, we're still fighting it out through the courts because of the children, but
Absolutely.
the divorce took about 3 years. I never wanted a divorce. Even the thought of being called a divorcee or having an ex-wife and all that, like I gag on those words. I hate it. But it is what it is. And our marriage was always doomed as long as Robert had that, position of authority in her life. And I have very little contact with Paige now either. In many ways, she's no better and maybe even worse than she was years ago, because she really has no one in her life now to question Robert like I did. She's all in, which is sad.
Yeah.
Couple things. First, you bring up a good point. Whenever something's off, or somebody just you're not hearing from, somebody that you hear from all the time or you hang out all the time, to check on them, because it could be a multitude of things. But for us in the military communities, suicide is obviously a big issue, and so you get trained on looking for red flags, because those red flags could mean anything, but at the same time, it's probably not something good. And if you care about that person, you may be the only one that notices these red flags, and you need to check. And so I think that's a very good point to bring up with anybody you care about.
Yeah.
Have you ever done some deep investigating yourself on Robert, to as far as maybe like private investigator, or done some research trying to dig up a little more understanding of what the heck this guy's about, and what he's out there doing in Southern California whenever he's not on the phone and controlling people and things like that?
Well, yes and no. So I tried to do some digging. You won't find anything on the internet. Um, and I did, kind of a background search. I had like a traffic ticket many years ago, but that was it. In some regards, he was very open. He would share with us, and just us, by the way, what he was trying to accomplish. And so he had a very grandiose sense of self, which is another key trait for cult leaders, is that they feel like their mission, their goal is I guess grandiose. It's a big deal. Everybody should be paying attention to him. So he claimed to have good relationships with congressmen and senators. Alan Greenspan, the former chairman of the Fed, apparently he talked to him. He sent a letter to Saddam Hussein before Gulf War II, trying to advise him on what to do. And of course, Saddam didn't listen. So look what happened, right? I'm fairly certain that there's not much else to really uncover. Like, I know he was born and raised in Syria. He came over, married a fairly normal, looking and seemingly American woman. He never had a full-time job. She had the job. She worked at a hospital. She made the money. He was the one that went and gambled, and was the cult leader for us. So there's not much to find, but maybe the deeper question is, well, why did he do it? What was he getting out of it?
Right.
Yeah,
And
because I feel like that would be tough when there's a lot of unanswered questions from somebody that did a lot of damage. I guess, maybe you're moving on though, and maybe you're you don't want to know about that guy anymore. So I mean, that's understandable too.
Well, I think the here's what I've come up with when trying to answer the question of what did he get out of it and why did he do it. Put yourself in this situation where you have several people that just absolutely think you are better than sliced bread. Everything out of your mouth is absolutely brilliant, and they tithe to you. They listen to everything that you say, and they can't stop fawning over you. Well, it takes a really special, humble, disciplined person to reject that, to say, no, listen, we're buddies, but I'm not your God. I'm not your guru. This is inappropriate. There was one guy, we called him Brother Michael. He was about the same age as Robert and my in-laws. He's probably in his 70s. And he was kind of like, Batman and Robin. Uncle Robert was Batman. Brother Michael was Robin, right? He did whatever Robert said. And at one of our conferences, he literally kind of like bowed down. And it was kind of mocking, like he was kind of mocking, but he was saying like, I don't mind having someone tell me what to do and having a leader. And you, Robert, are that leader. And he kind of mockingly bowed down to him. And a healthy, in his mind, Christian leader would have said, time out, Michael, this is wrong. Sit up. Come on, don't do that. Right. And Robert soaked it in, as only Robert could. And so I think that's the simple answer. He just loved being able to manipulate and control people and loved the praise.
And a certain level of power too, right? You said that Paige's parents wouldn't make any decision without running it by Uncle Robert first. He has so much control in their lives from hundreds of miles away.
So one of the funny stories is when I first met my former, father-in-law. So I met Paige, we're dating, and like a month later on Thanksgiving, I go up to northern Idaho to meet them. And, I'm kind of auditioning for the future son-in-law, right? So I go down the hall to use the bathroom. And I'm a guy, so I stand up and I pee. And as soon as they open the door, there's Paige's father standing right in the doorway. He says, something along the lines of, I heard you standing up to pee. In our house, the men sit down to pee because it reduces splashing. And then I heard the phrase that I heard, I can't tell you how many times over the next 20 years, Uncle Robert taught us that.
Wow. That
was the level of control.
That's wild. I don't even know how to explain that. That's trying to
demasculate.
That's demasculate. Like you're gonna sit to pee. That's and the fact that he was at the door listen because he knew you were going to, and God, that
literally and his hearing wasn't the greatest, so he would always stand really close to me. So it was really uncomfortable.
Yes, I would have been terrified at that point, though. I'm about to marry this woman, and then the dad is not with it, because whenever you marry someone, you marry their family too, and they're going to be a big part of your life. That interaction alone, I would have been pretty terrified of my future. So that's rough.
The story how we met and the story of the title of the book, I'll just dive into it just briefly because I want you guys to read it. But
sure,
it's fascinating. So we met at a singles Bible study, right? And That's why you have singles Bible studies, right? So we met in a singles Bible study. We started dating shortly thereafter. And then, about like a month later, I met the parents and, hey, sit down to pee and all that. But after maybe a week of dating, I was 90% sure I wanted to marry this woman. So I had never been married before. I mean, I dated women before, but this was new to me. Like I thought she's the one. She was everything that I had prayed for. And I said, Lord, boy, beautiful, tall, athletic Christian woman. She checked all the boxes. But I had to meet her father and this Uncle Robert because she talked about him all the time. And so, yeah, that first meeting was a little weird with the dad. And then I met Uncle Robert a few months later. Same thing. Odd, weird, but somewhat harmless, which I was wrong. So we got married. But what makes the story really fascinating, okay, so the title of the book is Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger. Mm-hmm. And I almost get chills telling the story because it's been almost 27 years. But a few months before I met Paige, she was baptized. And Uncle Robert wasn't there, and he did not do the baptism. Oh boy, did that drive him nuts. And so she had graduated with a couple of master's degrees. She gets baptized, and she was going on a few dates with some local guys. She's in her mid-20s, moving on with her life, right? And then she has this dream, really important dream that she referenced throughout the rest of her life. And in the dream, she's in a house with a boyfriend at the time named Chad. And there's a tiger loose. And the tiger, if it finds her, is going to kill her. She does not want to kill the tiger. She just wants to kind of control it, know where it is, because the tiger represents to her things that she admires, strength and honor and dignity, et cetera, et cetera. Then the door of the house opens and a tall man walks in, but she can't see the face of the tall man. So she runs and hides. The boyfriend disappears. And she knows that the tall man is there to kill the tiger and get rid of it. Okay, so she has this dream probably several times. He sends Robert her interpretation of the dream. He writes back this long 23-page letter to her. Good. He writes the letter on a Wednesday, sends it on a Friday. We met that Sunday in 1996 in October. So she showed me the letter about a month after we met. And I just at the time didn't realize it. But the tall man comes in and she can't recognize the tall man because she can't see his face. Well, she'd never met me. Right. And then she hides and the boyfriend disappears. Okay, at the second Bible study, singles Bible study, she brought the guy Chad. And I met him that one time. After that Sunday, I never saw Chad again. He disappeared from her life, just like in the dream. And then the tiger, supposedly strength and honor and dignity, were all the things that Paige saw in Uncle Robert. And so Paige spent then the next 20 years, the bulk of our marriage, trying to resist my efforts at exposing the real tiger in her life. And guys, unfortunately, I didn't realize this until Lord really showed me 20 years later. So at the time, I'm like 28. I read this letter. It was really weird. I'm not going to save anybody. I can't save anybody. But even in the letter, Uncle Robert, who's 5'6", is trying to, and I'm 6'5", trying to like say, well, are you sure your dream had a tall guy? Like he's trying to change your dream. Right. And so he manipulated it, that letter, which Paige had me read, like a month after we're dating because it was so important to her. He manipulated it, convinced Paige that she was the tiger, that she was not a Christian, that she was a fraud, and then he was able to save her. And ever since then, because of his ability to manipulate it, it's still has a destructive presence in our lives.
Wow. I was wondering where the title came from because he was the short man and I didn't know where the tiger came involved. And so, wow. Okay.
It's fascinating. And again, it's like, well, come on, can the Lord speak to us in dreams? I don't know. He's God, right? I guess he can.
Well, Peter, I'm curious. Do you feel like you're 100%, obviously you're 100% removed, but you feel 100% recovered at this point? Or do you think it still has some like hooks in you?
No, I always tell people that there's not a number big enough, a million times stronger now than I was. Right. My faith is stronger. I did not turn my back on my faith. I mean, my faith is what saved me. So I don't look to any kind of a guru or to a spouse for approval like I did the last few years of our marriage. I was a shell of a man in constant fear, constantly doubting, which is the exact opposite of what the Bible teaches. Right. And so I'm a million times stronger now. I wish I could have learned this lesson a different way.
Sure.
So, I was beaten down, dragged at the bottom. It was horrible. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. But again, I'm much stronger now, and I've learned a lot. And my faith, because of what I went through, I can talk about this, and it doesn't bother me one bit. Writing the book was incredibly therapeutic and cathartic. And so I feel like, well, I went through this, right? It was horrific. Why don't I use that to try and help others? And so that's what I do now. And so when I say I'm stronger than ever, I also don't mean that in an arrogant way. It's because it's from the Lord gave me this strength.
Absolutely. I'm curious, have you had the opportunity to help anybody else out in a similar situation? Has anybody reached out to you and said, hey, how did you get out? How did you recover after the fact?
It's fascinating reading comments from readers who many of them have said maybe not something quite similar, but a certain relationship in their life, or it, kind of struck a nerve. A lot of people have said, thank you for writing it, kind of helped explain things. And then recently, about a few weeks ago, there's a tiny little church, I'm not going to say the name, where I live, where apparently there's some bad stuff going on. And so somebody there read the book, gave it to another person, and now there's 3 families that had already left this little church, and they all shared the same stories, and they all shared the common theme of a very inappropriate leader. And which is sad, but they now, they were able to get out and see that the red flags, before they spent 20 years in it like I did.
Maybe your book will be that book on their shelf for a year where they read it, and then all of a sudden they can kind of snap out of it and be like, oh, okay, I'm in danger. I need to get a plan here. I need to figure something out. But it's so tough whenever you're in love with someone, you have children, and it makes it a little different, because I think if it wasn't for that, it seems like you saw enough red flags along the way where if it wasn't for that situation, that I think you would have gotten yourself out, at some point. But I'm glad that you did have a support system to help you out and things like that.
I think the lesson to be learned is that, number one, it could happen to anybody. And I remember thinking, wow, it'll never happen to me. That's fine, but I'm just telling you, it could happen to anybody. Number one. Number two, we would not be having this conversation if it was not for my love for my wife, right? Like, I would have sat down with a cup of coffee with Robert Booty, and after 10 minutes, I'd say, well, he's really eccentric. After half an hour, I'd say he's nuts. So I would have never gotten in this deep if it hadn't been for my love for my wife. But I did. So it could happen to anybody for any number of reasons. For my book to reach somebody, if they really are having their mind controlled, because cults come in different shapes and sizes, they all look different, but at their core, they're undue mind control, manipulative, coercive mind control. Okay, that's what the cult leaders do. Okay, so if your mind is controlled, you could read my book and say, well, that's fascinating, but it's not us. It really takes for that person to somehow be removed from all the other cult members, and then the loved ones, the family or friends, to say, and they speak truth into this person's life. And that's about, as far as I know, the only way somebody can really get out of it. Because the moment you can say, this seems like a cult, you're probably not in it, because the person who has their mind controlled would never admit it. But if you can admit it, now that mind control is having diminished effect on you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess to go back a little bit, for your broadcasting career, I would imagine that's something where you're gone a lot. Is that correct? Because you probably had a lot of travel that you had to do to be on the
I did
scene.
play-by-play. Yeah, so you're either on the road or you're at home. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that would be even more opportunity for Robert as well, with you being gone, and which sucks because that's your dream career. A lot of people set out to want to be a sports broadcaster, and it doesn't happen. It's not something, it's not something everybody gets to do. But your background as a college athlete, things like that, obviously they know that and understand sports and competition, things like that. And so that sucks that you had this amazing career that you loved, and it was, being used in that way. I would like to kind of go into a little bit of that career as well, because that's very interesting. I know you were on Outdoor Life Network for a bit, but can you guys go through how that progressed?
Yeah, sure. So my first job was, the 6 and 10 Sports in Pocatello, Idaho. And I made $14,500 a year. This is mid-90s, but still, I mean, we
Okay.
were broke. It really was.
Yeah, dang.
Sure.
And by the way, like if I had said, no, I need more money, they would have gone on to the next guy, and there would have been 200 people who would have
Yeah. Oh,
applied for
yeah.
the job, right? Everybody,
But it's a
everybody.
start, and you get your reel and footage and
Right,
things like that,
right,
and move
right, right.
forward.
So we would cover mostly football, basketball, baseball, but I loved covering, where to go hiking, the skiing and fishing. And I heard about the Outdoor Life Network and sent in my tape. And they had just hired a guy named Rick LaCivita, brilliant producer, is now retired. But Rick, worked on Monday Night Football with Howard Cosell. He did the World Series, he did Olympics. And so in the latter half of his career, he's now at OLN. He hired me. And it was great. Here I thought, I'm going to be the next Bob Costas of outdoor sports, right? I'm going to be famous. And then about 4 or 5 years later, we were covering the alpine ski season. So think of, let's say, Bodie Miller, Lindsey Vaughn. Before she was Lindsey Vaughn, she was little Lindsey Killed Out. I don't know if these names mean anything to you, but, Michaela Schifrin, well, before Michaela skied, but, all of that. Okay.
Yeah.
And the headquarters for OLN were in Stamford, Connecticut. So they're having like a, department head meeting with the CEO and, head of production and sales and revenue center. And in every office up in the corner, and this at all the networks, they have this. There's the network on 24/7 and it's muted. Somebody says, boy, they're doing a great job with the ski covers this year. So the meeting stops and the CEO turns up with the clicker the volume and they start listening and I'm doing the call. And the CEO says, well, who's doing the play-by-play? And somebody says, well, it's Peter Young. And he says, who's Peter Young? So that's red flag number one.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody was looking around like, well, he's one of our main play-by-play guys. I was on every night on the network. And he says, well, his voice is flat. Red flag number two. So a year later, I didn't get my contract renewed. And so that's how fickle the business could be. So I kind of hung on for a few more years, but, I became a former sports broadcaster and a current real estate broker. And then I, tried to get back into the business, did some games for ESPN3, which was great.
What type of games?
College football and basketball. Loved it.
It's my favorite.
Oh, loved it. I mean,
I'm all on it.
I mean, I'm sitting at mid-court and they're paying me to talk like it's heaven.
That's the dream. Yeah, absolutely.
And but it's a very competitive business, and they're hiring guys half my age, and that's fine. And now as a single dad, I can't travel anymore. I've got kids 24/7, and that's okay. I miss the camaraderie, right? Like you and I could get on the headsets and we would call a game with, I don't know, like football or basketball, whatever it is. And being on ESPN or OLN or the networks was great. But the thing I miss the most is the camaraderie of the guys there in the booth calling the game. I remember doing the Cheyenne Frontier Days rodeo. So I did everything. I mean, I did skiing, cycling, and rodeo, and bull riding, and sailing, and beach soccer, you name it, rock climbing. And we're doing the Cheyenne Frontier Days rodeo, and we would do it live to tape, meaning they would edit it out. They wouldn't use the whole thing, right? We're on air for like 3 hours. They'll cut it down to a half-hour show. And me and the color guy, he was a former bull riding world champion. And you know how it is when you're not supposed to laugh, you can't stop laughing. So we're crying, laughing, in the booth with the headsets on, trying to do this rodeo. Literally crying, laughing. He's a world champion bull rider. I'm a play-by-play guy. I miss those moments, right? Like 20 years later, I'd still laugh at those memories.
That's how it
awesome.
was for us in the military. That's not being active military anymore. That's what I missed the most, was just hanging out with the guys. We were talking about before you got on how when we were mids, it turned into we would just take turns wrestling and trying to tap each other out just for no good reason at all, but just laughing at nonsense. I work on some sets, but you meet people and then 2-3 days later they're gone.
I remember playing in a basketball tournament in Alt, just south of Greeley.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's 7 minutes away from where I live.
the Alt Sertoma is what they called it. It was like Mankind or something like that. Yeah, it was a basketball tournament. And so I was coaching basketball at the University of Colorado at the time.
Oh, wow.
And so it was like just this, these, leagues for these, guys that you think they could still play. But it was like, out of the 10 guys on the court, 8 or 9 of them were former D1 players. It was a lot of fun.
The kid for Tennessee this year, Knight, or however you say his name, but he's like in the running for player of the year, probably number 2 behind Edie. He played out at UNC Greeley for a bit.
Oh, and then he transferred. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think he was D2 maybe before that, and he played a year in Greeley out there. at Northern Colorado, and then transferred over from there to Tennessee.
So let me tell you the curling story. So
For sure.
first of all, it's Duluth, Minnesota, right? So you don't think this is going to be, or you don't equate that with like the hotbed of Olympic athleticism. But
Right.
the one team won, right? So they're going to the Olympics, and again, the Olympics, the pinnacle of athletic performance worldwide. And the skip is the captain of the curling team, right? So I'm interviewing him. You go to the Olympics, and it's this guy that's got a Budweiser in one hand and a cigarette in the other.
Yep.
Love
That's
it.
awesome.
The Olympics.
I can remember we would sit out in our work office on night shift, and we would be watching curling. Probably like 7-8 years ago was the first time we ever heard of it, and everybody was so into it because it just seemed like such an everyman sport.
Yep.
Like to this day, we will watch it when it comes on, and everybody loves it.
I can't remember what that guy did for a living, but obviously he didn't make a living at curling. He might have been like an auto mechanic. I don't know, but he was an Olympian. He went to the Olympics.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome.
So what's the coolest game and or event? Actually, I want to know game first that you covered, or that stood out to you that you just enjoyed. Not just the camaraderie piece, but the game itself. You're like, wow, I get to be a part of this moment.
That's a tough one. I can tell you there were 2 occasions where I called a game for ESPN 3. Actually, no, one of them might have been for the Mountain West Network, where the play in the game made the ESPN's top 10 list back when that was a big deal.
Yeah. I still know that. Yeah.
So Larry Nance Jr., who I think still plays for the Lakers, or he's in the league.
He's a Pelican. I'm
Is
a
he?
Pelicans
Okay,
fan.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's still in the league. He was
awesome.
playing for the University of Wyoming and had this monster dunk, and it made ESPN's top 10. And they didn't use my call. Oh, so then, like a couple years later, I did Colorado State at Boise State. Same thing.
Okay.
This guy for CSU banks in a 3-pointer at the buzzer. They win, and they made the top 10 play, and they didn't use my call. Oh man. I'm in the hotel that night, waiting to hear
watching it.
Killing me, Smalls.
Oh, you're killing me, Smalls. You talked over me. So it's hard to say one particular game. I do remember covering the Big Sky tournament, and it was in Missoula, and I live in Montana. And so I did both the men and women. So I got to call like 20 games in 4 days. Like that was incredible. It was so much fun. Like I could call college basketball all day long.
Yeah.
That was great.
That would be awesome.
I remember probably the pinnacle of my career, though, was I was on CBS, so the network, not just the cable, and I did bull riding. So it was a PBR, and CBS was kind of dipping their toes in, like, well, let's try PBR. This is 20 years ago, and I did the call with Ty Murray, who was dating Jewel at the time.
Okay.
And Ty Murray, Michael Jordan of, rodeo,
Right.
and that was really cool. That was a cool moment. I mean, 20,000 people in this arena. You're doing the play-by-play. That was fun.
Yeah, PBR is a lot of fun, especially if you're there in person and everything.
Oh,
It's a very good, very, very fun feeling, and to be there and be involved. Yeah.
And then the pit in New Mexico, right? So where the University of New Mexico plays.
Mhm.
So I got to play there, coach there, and broadcast a game there. So that was kind of fun.
My wife's uncle was one of the coordinators out there at UNM for a bit. But then he had to get out of that career just because it was you're never home and you're recruiting constantly and that and this and that. And so he's a family man, and so he got into business stuff, kind of similar to you. It's just you hit a point where you got to be home for family reasons and things like that. But yeah.
Yep.
Which real estate was pretty smart too, because it's booming these days. So
yeah, oh yeah. So you can see behind me that the blue team, that's the name of my first novel. It's about faith in basketball, very loosely based on my time playing college basketball at George Washington University. I always joke that the fiction aspect of the book comes in because the main character is good. The team was good. But the sequel to the novel I'm working on, we'll release it this year in 2024. Cool. Thomas is now married. He's married the love interest in the first book, and he's now a college basketball coach. And the whole kind of moral of the story is, how do you balance the demands, whether you're a player or a coach in college or athletics, and being married and being a father?
Right.
It's hard. It's very hard.
Now you got to add the portal in there too, because I mean, I can't imagine too, because with college basketball, they opened that portal up before the beginning of the NCAA tournament. So if you're coaching in the tournament, you're having to check the portal too, and you're having to make those calls. And so, yeah, it's got to be near impossible. But people are doing it. But I wonder what the stats are on people doing that and divorce and things like that.
It's a mess. I have no problem with players getting paid. I really don't. I have no problem with that. But it's a mess, right? I mean, they need to do something to fix it up.
My personal opinion, I like it. I would like to see a cap and maybe dividing Division I out a little differently, because there needs to be a cap, just like the NBA and all that. They do a cap for obvious reasons, and so I think they need to separate divisions up differently and have a cap for each division. And if your school can't afford to be in that bracket, then you should have your own. Because I get everybody wants, especially basketball, you can have your Cinderellas beating those big schools that have those huge budgets, but
football, that will never happen. Yeah, in football, that'll never happen. Yeah, there's no way. There's no way Montana's beating Alabama. Never happen. On the basketball court, maybe. Football, never. And Jay Billick, what he said was just have them sign contracts. Because then the problem is, it's like, well, I can get more NIL money at this school, so they leave. You're not going to solve the money issue. You'll solve that issue of kids just going everywhere. Just have them sign a contract. They're an employee of the university. Might make people uncomfortable. That's probably where it's headed. Yeah.
But part of that's tough for me too is coaches aren't always honest. Coaches, maybe take another job, and then all of a sudden you're in a whole nother system, and maybe that system doesn't fit you and things like that. And so I still want to allow them to transfer, just because you're more of a running QB and you're throwing shorter passes, and all of a sudden you get in an offense where you're throwing bombs, and it'd be nice to get that opportunity to go somewhere else and do well. And so I don't know. It's hard to navigate.
Think about it this. Can you name a single Division I men's basketball player in the NCAA tournament? I can't. And 20 years ago, I could name 50. Now, maybe you can, but I can't name you one. And I used to play and coach in college. That's because guys are just one and done, in and out. They're transferring here and there.
Yeah.
And that's a problem for college basketball.
I would agree, because I do follow and I do know a lot of the big names, but it is tough whenever, like, I'm a Razorback fan. And so between last year, they make the Elite Eight. This year, they don't even make the tournament, but we had a lot of transfers that I loved. And then, but it was a whole new team. So I had to get used to like who's who. But the problem is they don't figure out the rotation like till the end of the year, until it's too late.
So I didn't know you were a Razorback fan, so you'll get a kick out of this story. So about 12 years ago, when I was trying to make my comeback into TV, I got to call D-League games and loved it. So the NBA's minor league. And guess who I was calling games with? Coach Musselman.
No.
Yep.
God, so I don't know if you can see it right behind me, but I got a Muss signed card.
Is that him?
Yeah, and then a card there signed by him.
So that was probably like the 1 year of his adult life where he wasn't coaching. Like, he was in between jobs. He was doing TV. At every game we went to, we only did like 4 or 5 games together, and he was a riot. He's hilarious.
He seems fun.
Oh, he looks like he's 12 years old. It's hilarious.
He takes his shirt off. I mean, come on.
Oh my gosh. So, and every game we would go to, like beforehand, he would just sit and talk with the coaches, and again, he's networking because he wanted to get back in. I knew that.
Yeah.
And here's one of those surreal moments where at the time didn't mean much. 10, 15 years later, I look back, I think, wow. And I'm sitting here at courtside as the players are warming up. And here's Eric Musselman, who now is, his career has been resurrected. He's head coach at Arkansas, making millions. And he's talking to the head coach for the Iowa Energy, Nick Nurse, before he wanted a title.
Wow.
So I'm sitting there, the three of us are sitting there talking,
Very cool. That's the kind of stories I wanted to get into, man. You've had a very interesting life. And I'm just glad that you're moving in a better place. You're helping people out. Yeah, man, what an exciting life you were having, but then you had this other thing, this family life that's pulling you away from it.
Yeah, and you think about from the athletic realm, like how do you get stronger? By literally punishing your body in the weight room, right? Like, you stress yourself, that's how you improve. boy, I've had lots of opportunity to improve in my life. And I've had lots of opportunities to learn and grow. And thank the Lord I have. Like, when my broadcasting career, took a nosedive, I was kind of cocky. I was kind of arrogant. I kind of needed that.
Sure.
And that was what happened with my family and the marriage and all that. I learned from it. And that's most important, right?
Right.
Yeah. Right now and today, so you're doing real estate, you're writing a lot of books. What does the future look like for you?
So I continue to write. I will publish the sequel to The Blue Team in 2024. I don't even have the title yet. I'm still working on that. The book is probably about 90, maybe 85, 90% done. So I'll have that out later this year. And again, I kind of say tongue in cheek, but it was accurate. I wanted to be the next Larry Bird. Then I wanted to be the next John Wooden. Then I wanted to be the next Bob Costas. And what the Lord has really taught me is that, we don't need a second Bob Costas. We don't need a second Larry Bird. He created me, Peter Young, for a reason. So now I'm trying to be the best me. I'm trying to be the best Peter Young, whatever that is. And so each and every day, I'll pick up my cross and follow him. Be a good dad. Be a good friend. Do well in my work. Do whatever it is I'm doing that day. That's a wonderful lesson to learn. I wonder how many people really do know that. I wish I would have learned that in my 20s rather than my 40s and 50s. So now
Absolutely.
I call, high school basketball games at the local private school, and I write, and I just I love being a dad.
That's awesome. No, I think there's like a saying that's something like success is measured by a life well lived, something along that. It sounds like you're doing that.
Trying to,
And
yeah.
I think that's the best example you can set for your kids and any family that's maybe looking for a different view on what they're experiencing right now. So good
Right.
on you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this has been fun. Maybe I'll have to come
Yes.
back on and we'll talk more sports when I publish the sequel, because then we could talk, focus more on athletics.
Hey,
Absolutely.
I think the Blue Team would make for a good Christian film. Greater is one I love too.
Yep, saw that one very well. Yep, Arkansas. Yep.
Yeah,
Saw
they
that one.
got a really good named actor in that. I forget his name too, but he's in Justified and a lot of things. But yeah, that the Blue Team would. I'm here to say that would be. It sounds like a good Christian film right there.
Well, you got to read the book. You got to read the book, and then we'll do this some other times. They can read both of them, and it'll be a trilogy. There'll be a third book as well.
Okay.
No, those are the only two, and I never planned on being an author. I always knew I had great characters because, again, the Blue Team was based on what I experienced in college, and I knew I had a good story. It was just a question of whether or not I could write it. So I worked on it off and on for 20 years, and then I just fell in love with the storytelling bug, because that's what we do as sports broadcasters. We tell stories.
Yeah.
And so I love the process of telling stories. So I've got 2 books published. The sequel will come out this year, and then hopefully in 2025, the last in the Blue Team trilogy will come out. After that, we'll.
Okay.
Definitely.
All right. So, well, I guess we'll wrap up on that. And do you have anything else you'd like to shout out today, as any socials or anything like that?
Well, just that you can get my book, Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger, as well as The Blue Team, on Amazon. I also have my own website. It's authorpeteryoung.com. And I've got some videos on there. They're good storytelling videos. So yeah, I would love for you to really, to get the memoir, because I really do feel like it's a very important topic. It's better to be forewarned and armed that these little cults are out there, and they can hide pretty easily. So you really got to be educated.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely appreciate your time, Peter. This has been absolutely fascinating. You have a wild story, and looks like you've come out better for it in the end, and happy for you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. Thank
you.
Very,
very much appreciate you, and I'm glad that you're on the other end of things and things are going well. And yeah, I'm looking forward to reading your books. And yeah, I just wish you the best. And it was fun today. Definitely want to talk some more sports with you.
It was a good time.
Yeah. We can talk sports all day.
I like it.
All right.
Well, hey, you have a good one, Peter.